They're taking their complaint right to the top. The National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM, is proceeding with a libel suit against Prime Minister Stephen Harper and his chief spokesman, Jason McDonald. The claim refers to public comments made by Mr. McDonald in January that linked the NCCM to a terrorist organization. Jeff Saikaley is the lawyer representing the NCCM. We reached him at his office in Ottawa.
Mr. Saikaley, this story begins back in January of this year. What did Jason McDonald, the spokesperson for the Prime Minister's office, say?
Well, Carol, the context was an open letter that was sent by our client, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, to the Prime Minister's office, asking the Prime Minister to reconsider an invitation he had made to a rabbi with some controversial ties to anti-Islamic individuals, asking him to reconsider that invitation on his trip to the Middle East. Instead of responding to that particular criticism questioned by the NCCM, Jason McDonald, the Director of Communications for the Prime Minister, instead responded with an attack on the organization, saying that he wouldn't take seriously any criticism from, quote, an organization with documented ties to terrorist organizations such as Hamas.
You will not accept criticism for an organization with documented ties to a terrorist organization such as Hamas. Does the National Council of Canadian Muslims have any connections to Hamas?
Absolutely not.
Does it support Hamas?
It does not, and in fact, it's been quite clear on the public record that it does not support Hamas or any other group that advocates for extremist actions and violence, and it's been quite clear that it denounces Hamas and other groups.
What was the problem that the National Council of Canadian Muslims had with Rabbi Daniel Korobkin, who is the person that you're referring to in that January incident? What problem did they have with him being part of Stephen Harper's delegation to Israel?
That particular rabbi had been part of a conference where two individuals who are known to be anti-Islamic, who were making presentations, and he had given words of support to those individuals in the presentation and introduction of them. And so the NCCM felt it would be inappropriate for that rabbi to be part of the trip to the Middle East, given the supportive comments he had made to those individuals.
And what did the NCCM, what did they expect to hear back from the Prime Minister when they said that they thought it was inappropriate for this rabbi to go on the trip?
Well, firstly, they were hopeful that he would, in fact, reconsider his decision and maybe realize that it may have not been a proper choice. Secondly, at the very least, a substantive response to that actual question and, maybe have him explain his reasoning and his decision. Instead, he chose to ignore the actual question and instead attack the organization.
Did you ask Jason McDonald to explain what he meant?
Immediately after the statement was made, the organization issued a notice of libel and served it on the PMO, Jason McDonald, and the Prime Minister, and asked that they retract the statement. And in fact, there's been no response, no retraction, no explanation since that time.
Now, the National Council for Canadian Muslims is a new name for the organization. It was also been known before as CAIR Canada, CAIR, which stands for Council for American Islamic Relations, a U.S.-based group. And that group has been investigated in the United States for having links to Hamas.
That's correct. The organization, the NCCM, changed its name in 2013, in particular to relate more to Canadians, because as you noted, the name CARE has American in it, and so the name change had more to do with being more relevant to the Canadian Muslims that it in fact represented here. So that's why the name was changed in 2013.
And not to distance itself from an organization being investigated in the U.S. for ties to Hamas?
The fact of the matter is that the name itself was used since 2000. It's been about 14 years now, but the two organizations in Canada and the United States worked quite independently of each other. They had different board members that were completely independent. And the fact of the matter is as well that the U.S. group was, in fact, named as co-conspirator in some investigation done in the United States and has been since cleared from that investigation. And so there was no effort to distance themselves from the organization, mainly to rebrand and be more relevant to their Canadian constituents.
But in some effort to understand what Jason McDonald may have been referring to, do you believe it's possible that that is why he made the statement that they would not comment on an organization with documented ties to a terrorist organization?
That may have been his reasoning, and even so, it's quite an unfair statement to make, and it's quite a serious allegation to make in this post-9/11 world, to refer to an organization that's involved in public advocacy on behalf of Muslims in Canada, to refer to them as having documented ties to terrorist organizations. If that's in fact the allegation, well, what he's attempting to do is create guilt by association. This group has many board members, many volunteers, and is not responsible for comments or thoughts of their individuals. What the association has done is really the issue, and they themselves have no such documented ties to terrorist groups or Hamas.
What efforts has the National Council of Canadian Muslims done to distance itself from groups such as Hamas or I guess Al-Qaeda as well, the organizations of that nature?
Well, there's been no real reason to distance themselves. They've never been actually close. What they've simply done is publicly denounce them, publicly denounce the violence and the extremism and the terrorism of these organizations. They've said that on many different occasions.
And they've also played, the organization has played a role with the federal government before. They have been of some assistance to authorities, yes?
Absolutely, and that's what's surprising as well about the comments made by the PMO, is that this organization is known to the Canadian government. They've worked hand in hand with law enforcement, RCMP, for 14 years. I mean, they've participated in public inquiries, appeared before the Supreme Court of Canada. The board members themselves are well known to the government, and there's been never an issue raised until this comment in January, which is the reason for this lawsuit, that it just came out of nowhere, really, and it's quite a serious allegation to make.
So they've testified at public inquiries. They've aided security agencies, RCMP. They've appeared before the Supreme Court of Canada. Has it ever been raised before that they had ties to any terrorist organization?
To my knowledge, Carol, never once until that statement by Jason McDonald.
And now so you have this suit. What possibilities are there besides pursuing it? Is it possible that the Jason McDonald, the Prime Minister's office, can issue an apology and retract this?
It's definitely possible, and in fact, since the notice of libel was served in January, we've had opportunities to discuss the matter with their counsel, and we've tried to arrive at some resolution, and unfortunately we haven't come to that settlement at this date, and we're still hopeful that despite the litigation having been commenced, that the Prime Minister's office will reconsider this and issue the retraction that we've been asking for, and hopefully put this matter to an end.
All right, we will continue to follow the story. Mr. Saikaley, thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Jeff Saikaley is the lawyer representing the National Council of Canadian Muslims. The NCCM filed a lawsuit today against Prime Minister Stephen Harper and his spokesman, Jason McDonald.